July 7, 1944. The darkness of pre-dawn wrapped itself around the Tanapag Plain in Saipan. A Marine artillery observer, Corporal James Whelan, bent over his damp notebook, his pencil scratching down coordinates. Just a few numbers on a page, yet those numbers would decide the fate of thousands of men before the day was done. Through his field glasses, Whelan saw what seemed impossible in the modern age. Thousands of Japanese soldiers preparing a human wave attack, bayonets fixed, officers raising gleaming swords. Even the wounded, bandaged and limping, dragged themselves forward. Behind them, civilians clutching bamboo spears joined the ranks. This was not an ordinary assault. It was the largest Banzai Charge of the Pacific War. What the Japanese did not know was that they were about to march straight into the deadliest fire control system the world had ever seen. American artillery, mathematically precise, devastatingly coordinated, was waiting for them. This is the story of courage colliding with technology, of human spirit crashing against industrial firepower. The story of Saipan's Banzai Charge, where the dreams of empire met the cold logic of modern war. The summer of 1944 marked a turning point in the Pacific. For nearly 3 years, American forces had fought island by island, clawing their way across the vast ocean. Saipan, part of the Mariana Islands, was more than just another piece of land. It was a fortress that Japan could not afford to lose. From its airfields, American B-29 bombers would be able to strike Tokyo directly. To the Japanese leadership, the defense of Saipan was tied to the survival of the empire itself. The Americans knew the stakes as well. They launched one of the largest amphibious operations of World War II. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, along with the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division, stormed the beaches in June. Fierce resistance, hidden bunkers, and sniper fire claimed thousands of lives. But step by step, hill by hill, the Americans pushed the Japanese northward. By early July, the once formidable Japanese garrison was broken. Of the original 32,000 defenders, barely 5,000 remained capable of fighting. Still, General Yoshitsugu Saito refused surrender. His soldiers, sailors, and airmen were cornered in the island's northern cliffs. With the sea at their backs and no hope of rescue, Saito prepared them for one final act. Gyokusai, the death charge, a sacrifice meant to exalt true Japanese manhood. The Americans, however, were ready. Weeks of preparation had built the most sophisticated artillery network the Pacific had ever seen. Observers, radios, fire direction centers, and battleships offshore formed a web of firepower. The stage was set for tragedy on a scale neither side could have imagined. For centuries, Japan's warriors had believed that courage and sacrifice could overcome any enemy. By 1944, this ancient code had been reshaped into a military doctrine called Gyokusai, the belief that dying in battle, even in hopeless odds, was a form of ultimate victory. Soldiers were told that the spirit of Yamato Damashi, the Japanese soul, could pierce through American lines as surely as a sword through paper. It was not just strategy, it was faith, a spiritual promise whispered to every man who picked up a rifle. The Americans saw war differently. To them, victory did not depend on spiritual power, but on organization, technology, and firepower. Artillery was not just a weapon, it was a science. American fire direction centers could take reports from forward observers, calculate wind, temperature, and even the Earth's rotation, and deliver perfectly timed barrages. A call for fire could summon dozens of guns in less than 90 seconds. The contrast could not have been sharper. Japanese artillery, still clinging to methods from World War I, often relied on signal flags or runners. An American battery could strike a target in moments. A Japanese battery might take 15 minutes. In modern battle, that gap was fatal. On Saipan, these two philosophies would collide. One side believed the human spirit could break steel. The other believed steel, guided by mathematics, would always prevail. The battlefield would decide which vision of war belonged to the future. July 6, 1944. The northern end of Saipan was burning. The remnants of the Japanese garrison had been squeezed into cliffs and ravines, pressed between American lines and the unforgiving sea. General Yoshitsugu Saito knew the battle was lost, yet he refused surrender. In his final order, found later on his body, he wrote, "Whether we attack or whether we stay where we are, there is only death." However, in death, there is life. We must exalt true Japanese manhood. Through the night, Japanese soldiers prepared for their last stand. Every man capable of walking was assigned to an assault group. The wounded wrapped fresh bandages around their heads and tightened belts around broken ribs. Civilians, women, teenagers, even the elderly, were handed bamboo spears and told to follow the soldiers. Those too injured to move were given grenades and ordered to wait for American troops, to sacrifice themselves in final defiance. Across the lines, the Americans sensed what was coming. Forward observers reported unusual movement in the Japanese pocket. Intelligence officers intercepted fragments of desperate messages. More tellingly, Japanese artillery had fallen silent, conserving ammunition for a final act. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers of the 25th Marines positioned his companies carefully. He placed his strongest platoons along likely avenues of attack. Every forward observer was given backup radios and extra batteries. Artillery liaison officers were told to have every gun, every mortar, and every ship offshore prepared. The men whispered in their foxholes, clutching rifles in the humid night. They had faced Japanese attacks before, but this time they knew it would be different. The island held its breath. In the stillness before dawn, thousands of Japanese soldiers formed in the darkness, bayonets fixed, voices ready to scream the word that had echoed across the Pacific. Banzai! The first rays of dawn had not yet broken. On the Tanapag Plain, more than 4,000 Japanese soldiers, sailors, and civilians surged forward. The sound of thousands of voices tore through the night air. Banzai! 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 It was a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. From his ridgetop observation post, Corporal James Whelan lifted his radio. His voice was steady. Fire mission, grid 164-223. Enemy infantry in the open, estimated regiment strength, immediate suppression. Within seconds, the answer came. Roger, time on target. All available batteries, splash in 90 seconds. Then came silence. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the echo of the charge. And then the sky fell. Dozens of American artillery battalions unleashed their fury at once. Shells screamed through the air and exploded in perfect unison. The Japanese formation was ripped apart as if struck by a giant's hand. Men vanished in clouds of dirt and fire. The few who staggered onward were met by another barrage, then another, the fire walking back and forth across the valley like a farmer's scythe cutting wheat. Still they came. Wounded men dragged themselves through the smoke. Officers with drawn swords urged their soldiers forward. Some civilians, clutching bamboo spears, stumbled into the maelstrom. The courage was undeniable. The futility was absolute. By sunrise, the charge had become a slaughter. Whole companies of Japanese soldiers lay motionless in the fields. Yet small groups broke through. At 6:00 a.m., nearly 600 men penetrated American lines, overrunning gun crews of the 10th Marines. Artillerymen yanked firing locks from their howitzers and fought as infantry. Some even lowered their barrels, firing point blank into the rushing enemy. On the front lines, acts of heroism blazed amid the chaos. Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien, already wounded, mounted a jeep and fired its heavy machine gun until it fell silent. Surrounded, he drew 2 pistols and fought until he was cut down. His body later found among 30 dead Japanese. Private Thomas A. Baker, refusing evacuation after being wounded, fought alone until his last bullet. His body was discovered propped against a tree, his empty pistol in hand, 8 Japanese soldiers around him. Captain Benjamin Salomon, a battalion surgeon, picked up a machine gun to defend his patients, holding off nearly 100 attackers before he was killed at his weapon. By 7:30 a.m., the coordinated defense, artillery, mortars, naval gunfire, had shattered the great charge. The valley floor was carpeted with bodies. The largest Banzai Charge of the Pacific War had ended not in glory, but in ruin. Behind the thunder of exploding, shells lay something colder, something almost unimaginable: mathematics. The American artillery system on Saipan was not just powerful, it was scientific, precise, and ruthless in its efficiency. At the heart of this system stood the fire direction centers, small tents filled not with gunners, but with men holding slide rules, plotting boards and radios. When a forward observer called in a target, the process began like a well-rehearsed symphony. Coordinates were plotted on a master map. Distances and angles were measured, corrections for wind, air temperature, barrel wear, and even the rotation of the Earth were applied. Within 60 to 90 seconds, firing solutions were transmitted to every battery in range. Then came the brilliance of time on target. Instead of a rolling barrage, where shells landed in sequence, every battery fired so that their shells struck simultaneously. Guns farther away fired first, guns closer fired later. The result was terrifying, hundreds of shells appearing from the sky at once, giving the enemy no warning, no time to dive for cover. This was not warfare as the Japanese knew it. Their artillery doctrine, rooted in French methods of World War I, still emphasized individual batteries firing by direct observation. Communications often relied on runners or flags. A Japanese battery might take 15 minutes to respond to a target. By then, the battle had already shifted. On Saipan, the Americans had turned artillery into an industrial process. Colonel Louis Meeser, commander of the 10th Marine Artillery Regiment, had divided the island into numbered grid squares. Each battery already had firing data for every square, pre-calculated and ready. When the call came, grid 1 2, 2, 3, the guns did not hesitate. They already knew their task. The effect was devastating. Entire ravines that offered cover were obliterated by air bursts timed to detonate overhead. A tactic called ladder fire swept barrages forward and backward across advancing troops, cutting them down in waves. Mortars filled the gaps at close range, while naval guns thundered from offshore, their massive shells tearing craters into the earth. In less than 3 hours, over 12,000 artillery rounds had been fired. For every Japanese soldier who fell, an average of 3 shells had been spent. It was war reduced to a grim equation. Firepower multiplied by coordination equaled annihilation. The Japanese had believed that courage alone could bridge the gulf between their spirit and America's machines. On the morning of July 7, 1944, that belief was buried beneath a storm of steel. By mid-morning, the thunder had faded. Smoke drifted across the valley, carrying with it the acrid stench of gunpowder and burned earth. The charge that had begun with a roar of thousands now ended in silence, broken only by the cries of the wounded. The statistics told the story with brutal clarity. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers, sailors, and civilians lay dead. Entire regiments had ceased to exist. Of the 5,000 defenders still standing at dawn, barely a handful remained alive by noon. The largest Banzai Charge of the Pacific War had been obliterated in less than 6 hours. But victory came at a terrible price for the Americans as well. The 105th Infantry Regiment bore the brunt of the assault. 2 of its battalions suffered nearly 80% casualties. More than 400 men were killed, over 500 wounded. The 3rd Battalion, 10th Marines, lost more than 100 artillerymen. Many cut down as they fought hand-to-hand when their guns were overrun. The battlefield itself defied description. Bodies lay thick across the Tanapag Plain, so many that soldiers compared it to a cattle stampede that had been cut down mid-run. Some Japanese soldiers, too wounded to walk, had crawled forward clutching grenades. Others had died standing, bayonets fixed, frozen in defiance. Graves registration teams worked for days to count the fallen. 4,311 Japanese dead in total. For the Americans who survived, the memory was haunting. Many had seen death before, but never on this scale. Captain Edmund Love, the 27th Division's historian, recorded that hardened veterans trembled as they spoke of what they had witnessed. Not fear of defeat, but the sheer weight of killing. The industrial destruction of human life on a scale that shook the soul. The valley was quiet now, but in that silence lay the proof of a truth that would echo far beyond Saipan. Courage alone could not triumph over the cold mathematics of modern war. The destruction of the Saipan Banzai Charge was more than the end of a single battle. It was the death of an illusion. The Japanese High Command had clung to the belief that spiritual strength could compensate for material weakness. On July 7, 1944, that belief was buried beneath craters and shattered bodies. News of the defeat reached Tokyo like an earthquake. With Saipan lost, the American airfields of the Marianas brought Japan itself within range of B-29 bombers. The illusion of safety that had shielded the Japanese homeland was gone. Within weeks, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and his cabinet resigned in disgrace. The emperor's government, once confident of victory, now braced for survival. From the American perspective, Saipan was a turning point in World War II. The island became a forward base from which fleets of B-29s launched daily strikes on Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. By early 1945, these bombers reduced entire cities to ashes. The path from Saipan led directly to the firebombing of Tokyo, the invasion of Okinawa, and ultimately Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For soldiers on the ground, the impact was more personal. Many who had witnessed the charge carried its memory for life. Some spoke of it as a grim necessity, proof that American technology and discipline had saved their lives. Others admitted to being haunted by the one-sided nature of seeing the slaughter. Lieutenant Colonel Justice Chambers would later write, "There is no glory in what we did. We killed thousands of brave men who never had a chance. Yes, it was necessary. But it was not war as our fathers knew it." Strategically, the battle validated the American doctrine of overwhelming firepower and coordination. The fire direction centers, time on target missions, and integrated fire support became the model for modern warfare. These same tactics would be used in Korea, Vietnam, and even in the Gulf War decades later. For Japan, the lesson came too late. Saipan proved that the age of the bayonet charge was over. Courage, no matter how pure, could not stop steel guided by mathematics. The battlefield had declared the verdict. In modern war, spirit without technology is only sacrifice without result. The morning of July 7, 1944, ended with silence across the Tanapag Plain. 4,300 Japanese soldiers, sailors, and civilians lay still. Nearly 1,000 Americans, dead or wounded, bore witness to the cost of holding the line. In that valley, spirit had met system, courage had clashed with coordination, and the verdict of modern war had been declared. The Banzai Charge at Saipan was more than a battle. It was the end of an era. No longer could armies believe that massed infantry assaults, no matter how brave, could shatter defenses built on steel, radio, and calculation. The glorious charge, once romanticized in history, died on that island under the weight of American artillery. For Japan, the consequences were immediate. Saipan's fall led to the resignation of Prime Minister Tojo and brought the American homeland bombers within range of Tokyo. From the ashes of that defeat came the firebombing of cities and, in time, the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For America, Saipan was proof that investment in technology, coordination, and firepower would shape the outcome of World War II. But beyond the statistics and strategies lies a human truth. The men who charged shouted their last word, Banzai, with courage that cannot be denied. The men who stood against them, guided by radios and firing charts, unleashed a storm that no bravery could resist. One side had spirit, the other had systems. In the cruel arithmetic of war, systems prevailed, and so we are left with questions that reach beyond Saipan. In a world where technology dominates, is there still a place for courage? Can justice and peace be achieved without reducing human life to numbers in an equation? The lesson of Saipan urges us not to glorify death, but to honor life. It reminds us that freedom and peace are not guaranteed. They must be protected, not through blind sacrifice, but through unity, justice, and vigilance. World War II gave us many warnings. Saipan was one of them. The men who died on that plain showed us the futility of courage without tools, the danger of ideology without reason. Their sacrifice should never be forgotten. So I ask you now, if millions had to die for peace, what will you do to protect it today? Will you raise your voice against tyranny? Will you stand for justice, for freedom, for peace? History's verdict is clear. Courage without technology is tragedy. But courage with justice, courage with unity, courage with peace, that is the inheritance we must claim. Let us honor those who fell not by repeating their mistakes, but by ensuring that such sacrifice is never demanded again. Let us eliminate fascism, fight for peace, fight for justice, and fight for freedom. Because in the end, that is the legacy of World War II, and it is a legacy that belongs to all of us.